Good evening. We'll get started in just a few moments as we allow our participants to join. You're here to talk about ATT reporting. You're in the right place. I see we still have some participants joining. Just give it a few more moments.
Add-in facilitator.
I think I will go ahead and get started. I know we still have a few people joining, but there's always room to let in more people to join a discussion on ATT reporting. My name is Rachel Stahl. I'm Vice President at the Stimson Center and really pleased to have such a distinguished panel join us today to talk about ATT reporting. I want to start our event with a brief video to show you what we're actually talking about today. So let me just start that. Well, welcome again to those who have joined while we were starting with our intro video. I'm really delighted to co-host this. Oh, sorry, something is not okay. I think, can you hear me? We're good? Okay. I'm delighted to co-host this event with the ATT Monitor and to share the screen with really true experts in the ATT reporting and transparency field. Karina Somorano and I will be moderating this event today together and guide you through this discussion. Reporting is really a core component of the ATT and one that can serve a number of important functions, as you just saw in the video. ATT initial reports really can be essential tools for understanding, for monitoring, and evaluating treaty implementation. While annual reports can provide valuable insights into regional and global weapons flows and facilitate assessments of treaty compliance. So in short, ATT has great potential to promote transparency and build confidence between states engaging in international arms transfers. And today at this event, we're going to take stock of where we are in terms of ATT reporting. The work we are discussing today was funded by the governments of Germany, Netherlands, and Switzerland, and I am grateful to all three for their commitment to working to ensure that the ATT lives up to its potential in fulfilling its transparency objectives. And I immediately want to turn over to Rainer Schmidtchen, who is from the German Federal Foreign Office, to provide some introductory remarks.
Thank you, Rachel. And I'm happy to be invited again. To be honest, I'm feeling already like being an old Stimson hand, or like belonging to the Friends of Control Arms, something like that. Prior to our discussion, please allow me 3 remarks. First, on reporting in today's working group session. The statistics on reporting presented by the Secretariat were not encouraging. To be honest, I was a little bit flabbergasted. I think you call it flabbergasted, is it the right word? By the steady increase of annual reports due. And I have reasons to believe that the Secretariat might be right in assuming that, I quote, states may not aware that they have to report. I think that the EU statement on reporting was really good today. And yes, reporting should generally mean public reporting. Everything else is neither fully transparent nor really helpful. My second point is German reporting, with relevance to other countries perhaps. My colleague, Ms. Sasse, who is taking part in our side event, is my witness. If one looks at it seriously, all German reporting is the work of one man, a hard-working civil servant with a military rank, who has been active on German reporting for many years and who has been supporting the Federal Foreign Office in its ATT-related activities ever since the ATT was drafted. Some states have people like him, some states have not. And this is exactly the point where organizations such as Stimson or Control Arms become very relevant. Your outreach to the states parties is very important, and I wished that we all would be more successful in future in helping others, in first instance states parties with deficits in reporting, to make better use of well-meant offers by organizations such as the ones you represent, you and Karina. And please let me add that any organization which would develop a convincing concept to considerably improving the reporting rates of states parties could be sure of Germany's support. And my third little point could perhaps be called Stimson, Control Arms, and the Germans. Yes, we appreciate the support your projects. We appreciate and support your projects, and we are somewhat proud of that cooperation. The ATT might have other weaknesses too, but the reporting issue is, from my point of view, one of the most pressing problems. In that regard, your valuable work needs a big applause from time to time. Please take my words as your applause for today. We Germans look forward to cooperating with you in future. And let me conclude by wishing us all an interesting side event now and a good PrepCom tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rainer, and thank you also, Rachel. I think we are very proud as well of the collaboration that we've been having with Germany over the last 2 years. And I would like to introduce another friend of the house and of the projects that both the Stimson Center and the ATT Monitor conduct on a yearly basis. But now she is wearing the hat as the co-chair of the working group on transparency and reporting, Ms. Sabine Visser. One of the things that we heard today, in addition to the comments that Rainer made in terms of, the reporting trends that are concerning over the last couple of years, and I noticed that you have a very ambitious agenda for the CSP 8 cycle into the CSP 9 cycle. So I would like to ask you if you can tell us a little bit more about the priorities of the working group for this year.
Thank you. Thank you, Karina and Rachel, for having us at this seminar, and to Mr. Schmidtchen for your kind words and your commitment to increasing transparency and reporting in the ATT. As the new co-chairs, Brazil and I are still fleshing out our priorities, and therefore we are very eager to hear from you, as Mr. Schmidtchen mentioned, the real experts, what you think should be on top of our agenda as well. But first from our side, so priority number one is and will remain bucking the negative trend in reporting. About half of all countries are not fully complying with their reporting obligations. We heard this today. That's too low. In spite of all the efforts of past co-chairs, outreach efforts by previous presidencies, the ATT Secretariat, the downward trend in reporting is continuing. I'm not saying we have the magic bullet. If you do, give us a call. We're very interested. But that certainly is going to be on top of our list of topics to address. One way that we would like to contribute to it is to continue developing and enhancing national capacities and procedures for reporting obligations. We mean to do this by sharing best practices in the working group. So we are keen to hear more from states that have managed to comply with reporting efforts and obligations and are working on it as well. So what steps that they are going to take and how they are experiencing that. We would also like to engage states participants on other topics to improve reporting, such as data aggregation and issues such as gender-based violence, which featured in our working group today. We are also hopeful that the informal peer-to-peer network on reporting will resume once the pandemic permits. Secondly, we would like to ensure that all information that is submitted is made available and is used. That means countering the trend of more private reporting or reporting that is made available to states parties only, but also through continuing the work on the online searchable database, making access to reports more user-friendly. I know as a delegate to my country, I rarely go through all the national reports. I leave that to you guys to do, which is much appreciated, but it would be good to have it available in a more user-friendly way. Thirdly, we want to create links between outreach efforts and outreach and assistance efforts and the guidance tools and the practices. For example, by having beneficiaries from assistance, such as the VTF, sharing experiences and having these experience feedback in the Q&A type documents and other guidance tools. Obviously, we want the guidance tools, such as the Q&A type document, to be as up to date as possible. And we started that effort today by incorporating the revised reporting templates. We also want to enhance transparency by more information sharing by the online tool, which is not being used very well at the moment. We also look forward to having in-person meetings again once the pandemic allows, because in spite of everyone's efforts to progress the ATT work, in-person meeting really do provide a better basis for information sharing. In that sense, we also very much look forward to the first meeting of the Diversion Information Exchange Forum once, Corona permitting. Finally, we are looking to streamline the work plan for the working group on transparency and reporting. The current work plan has a lot of standing and recurring agenda items, which requires us to work through a lot of points per meeting. We would prefer to have a more targeted meeting so we can have a more in-depth discussion. We are thus looking for a little streamlining in the mandate for the period between the CSP 8 and CSP 9. But at the end of the day, we are here to serve and facilitate discussions. So we are very much so at your disposal and are very, very eager to hear what you think should be on top of our priorities list. So do please share. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sabine, and thanks to you and the government of the Netherlands for really stalwart commitment to this issue, not only in supporting projects like Karina's in mind, but also really for taking on leadership of the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting. It's wonderful to see you and Grizel come to the Working Group as co-chairs with new energy and reinvigorated commitment to seeing some real progress, and hopefully sort of the lack of momentum that we've seen, I think a large part due to the pandemic will be reversed with your approach to a more streamlined process. And so I want to introduce our other new co-chair from the government of Panama, Grizel Rodriguez, to also share some of her views on ATT reporting.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And also thanks to Stimson Center and the ATT Monitor, especially both of you, Rachel and Karina, for inviting us, and also to Germany, the Netherlands, and Switzerland for co-sponsoring this event and for their strong support to our efforts in promoting more robust and transparent reporting in the ATT in 2022 and onwards. I do not have much to add from what have already been said by Sabine with regards to our preliminary reflections on this year's priorities for the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting. But maybe I can take this opportunity to encourage all participants, including state parties, international organizations, and civil society organizations, to engage with us before and during the next meeting of the working group, either in writing via email to the co-chairs and the ATT Secretariat or via the information exchange platform, or other contributions in our next session to ensure that your views are taken into account and properly reflected in the report that we will submit for the CSP8. In the co-chairs introductory paper, we identify some points that we look forward to receive your written contributions. Those points are the means to support state parties in addressing the reporting challenges, the suggested amendments, FAQ type guidance document on the annual reporting obligations, substantive issues participants want to see discussed in the working group, structure mechanisms, processes, or formats facilitating the information exchanges, the implementation of the three-tier approach for sharing information on diversion, improvements to the IT platform to enhance transparency and facilitate the implementation of the reporting and information exchange obligations of the treaty. We will study ways to enhance dialogue and outreach with state parties that have not submitted their initial reports and those who have not submitted their annual reports for quite some time. On the question of the availability of reports to state parties only, we are of the view that while there is no treaty obligation to make reports available to the public, it strongly contributes to the treaty's objective of transparency and enhance opportunity for technical assistance and cooperation. Different stakeholders, including international organizations and civil society partners, have conveyed their willingness in supporting state parties to provide such technical assistance and cooperation. Also, we urge participants to take advantage of the IT tools that are at your disposal and which are relevant to our task within the working group. And I raised this issue given that the number of users of the information exchange platform remains quite limited, low. And this IT tool is one of the predefined tiers in the three-tier approach to sharing information on diversion. And to conclude, I want to echo Sabine's invitation to participants to share their views during this event about topics that should be among our priorities for this cycle, and what would be the most efficient ways to continue our work on the online searchable database and other topics such as gender considerations, and how to better streamline the work plan for the working group. Thank you for your attention.
Gracias, Grisel. Thank you so much, Grisel and Sabine. And thank you on behalf of the ATT Monitor and of course, for including today a very interesting conversation about gender and how gender can be included in the conversations about transparency and reporting. So for now, I would like to introduce you to Rachel Stahl, to whom, of course, you know, she's the Vice President of the Stimson Center, but she's also been leading a project within the Stimson Center called the ATT BAP, the Arms Trade Treaty Baseline Assessment Project, for many years now. And today she will be introducing us two new reports that take stock of 6 years, right, Rachel, of ATT reporting, both initial and annual reports. So Rachel, the floor or the screen is yours.
Thank you, Karina. I hopefully am sharing my screen and you can all see this. Because now it's always weird because I can't see any of you, which is challenging. But I want to just point out one thing. Karina and I are both going to be presenting a lot of information in our presentations. And so the Q&A function is available to you if you have clarifying questions, as we won't be able to go through everything that are in our reports or soon to be reports. So as you mentioned, Karina, we have been taking the last year to really examine ATT reporting and whether the ATT is living up to expectations with regards to transparency. And that core question really motivated the development of 2 new Stimson reports, taking stock of ATT initial reports and taking stock of ATT annual reports, which we are excited to be launching today. If we were in person, I would have loved to hand you all hard copies, but for now, a virtual copy will have to do. The reports really assess the extent to which ATT reporting has made unique contributions to enhancing our understanding of national transfer control systems and arms trade dynamics. The reports review the status of ATT reporting as of December 2021. So obviously, as we heard today, there have been some new reports since the beginning of the year, but our reports cover information that was received on the ATT Secretariat's webpage by December 2021. We examine trends in reporting compliance and transparency. We review the information that states parties have provided in their reports. We compare ATT reporting to under the UN Program of Action on Small Arms and Light Weapons and the UN Register of Conventional Arms to see, are we actually enhancing transparency through ATT reporting? And each report also identifies opportunities for states parties, the ATT Secretariat, the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting, civil society, and other stakeholders to enhance ATT reporting and further the treaty's transparency aims. The reports obviously cover a lot of ground, and it's 2 of them, so I'm not going to touch on all of the findings here today. Instead, I want to focus my remarks on 3 of the main transparency challenges that we've identified in both ATT initial and annual reporting, namely compliance issues, the increase in private reporting, and issues around whether and how information is reported. So starting with compliance issues, if we look back at the last 6 years of ATT reporting, and I realize I should say the ATT Secretariat did a remarkable job this morning presenting some of this information. I also realize that some of our participants were not at the ATT meetings this morning, so I apologize if this is a little repetitive for some of you, but I promise I will go through this quickly. I think really compliance is the most significant barrier to realizing the treaty's transparency aims. While all 110 states parties are due to submit their initial reports on treaty implementation, only 84 have done so, which is 76% compliance. Of the 26 states parties that have yet to submit their ATT initial reports, the vast majority are several years past due in meeting their reporting obligations. Excuse me. Our data show that early ratifiers of the ATT are more often late in complying with their initial reporting requirements. 18 of the 26 non-reporting states parties are more than 3 years late in submitting their ATT initial reports. Given the extended delays in reporting for several of these states parties, this trend really deserves greater scrutiny to better understand why certain early states parties remain unable to complete their reporting obligations and how best to assist these states parties. In our report, we say that only 5 states parties have provided updates to their initial reports with information on any new measures undertaken in order to implement the ATT as required under Article 13.1, despite several additional states parties indicating at meetings and technical workshops that they have modified their transfer control systems in response to the ATT. And we, in fact, heard many of those examples in the past 2 days at the working group meetings. I was delighted to see, as the ATT Secretariat mentioned this morning, that we have an additional updated report. So we're now up to 6, which is a good trend to continue. Of the 105 states parties that have been required to submit at least one annual report over the last 6 years, 75 have submitted an annual report at least once since reporting was due. The remaining 30 states parties due to submit at least one annual report have yet to do so. And I think perhaps more troubling than the actual number is that we're seeing the annual reporting obligation decline over the past several years. And this year is actually the lowest annual reporting compliance rate that we have seen. Recognizing that the pandemic has made interagency processes and communication often more difficult, or if information is in the office and you're working from home, that may make it difficult. It's certainly a very worrying trend that we need to follow. And in short, we are falling short of the required universal reporting under the ATT for both initial and annual report, and momentum does seem to be waning. So this is the time to have a quick reversal of those trends. The second issue that we found across both reports is the marked increase in private reporting for both initial and annual reports. And this is when reports are submitted, but they're made available only to other ATT states parties and the ATT Secretariat. Interestingly, we found that none of the first 25 initial reports submitted were private, but 16 of the 25 most recent submitted initial reports, which is 64%, have been private. So to date, nearly 20 states parties have made their initial ATT reports private, which is nearly a quarter of all reporting states parties. And that, again, is a worrying trend to see that upward tick. Again, on annual reports, we see a similar trend. Only 4% of annual reports submitted the first year were private, but 30%, more than 30% now of those submitted most recently were private. The one report that has been submitted since December 2021 was private. So that means that we have a 31% private rate for the most recent reports. Now, states parties have a variety of reasons for choosing to make their initial reports private. And I want to say this trend is not entirely attributable to first-time reporters opting to report privately. We've identified at least 8 states parties that appear to be shifting towards private reporting. In other words, all 8 began reporting publicly, but have exclusively submitted private annual reports in recent years. And if you total all of the annual reports, which is 358 annual reports that have been submitted over the last 6 years, 55% or 55 annual reports, which is 15%, are private. So there are lots of reasons why states choose to do this. Some of them are understandable in terms of releasing sensitive information. Some states parties appear to have restricted access to their initial reports by mistake. And we have spoken with some of those reports. Some of those have been corrected. Whatever the cause, though, the growing trend in private reporting really raises several concerns, as the practice, of course, hinders assessment of transfer control systems and weapons flows and makes it difficult for people like Karina and I to determine good practice and identify assistance needs and capabilities. The third takeaway from our research is that in many cases, the insights provided by initial and annual reports, even those that are submitted publicly, are limited by information that's outdated, that's withheld or omitted or aggregated. As I mentioned previously, relatively few states parties have provided updates to their initial reports, despite hearing all of this information about how states parties have made changes to their national control system since joining the ATT. So as a result, many initial reports contain outdated information, which can limit their utility. In some cases, ATT initial reports contain less detailed information on specific elements of a state's national control system other than other national reports that they have repeated. So if we look at the UN Program of Action reporting form, for example, it asks much more explicit questions about risk mitigation measures, brokering controls, international cooperation and assistance than the ATT initial reporting template. And so in many cases, states provide much more detailed information in their POA reports than they do in their ATT reports. It's worth noting that the revised initial reporting template that was endorsed by the 7th Conference on States Parties explicitly invite states parties to provide more detailed information about various aspects of their national control systems, and includes new questions relating to international assistance, which may prove quite useful in eliciting more detailed responses. And so I would encourage states, when they update their initial reports, to not only use that new template, but provide detailed and specific information as they update their reports. Information is often omitted or withheld, often without explanation, from several states parties' annual reports. We're talking about things like the number or value of weapons imported or exported, the importing or exporting state, whether the information contained within the report reflects actual or authorized transfers, which makes it very difficult to really get an idea or a picture of transfers around the world. In addition, during each of the last 6 years of ATT annual reporting, some states parties aggregate information in their reports in ways that prevents detailed analysis of weapons flows. This includes states parties that report the aggregate number of a given category of weapons exported to a particular state or a group of states without indicating the number or value that was transferred to or from each state, a practice that's particularly common with regard to small arms and light weapons transfers. And relatedly, some states parties actually only report on their small arms and light weapons transfers in aggregate without utilizing the reporting template subcategories of small arms and light weapons to indicate the specific type of weapon that was imported and exported. And of course, all of these conditions, failing to update their outdated reports, omitting or withholding information, aggregating the data to the point it becomes impossible to analyze effectively, undermines efforts to promote meaningful arms trade transparency. I want to just end by sharing some of the conclusions and next steps that we outline in the report, because we wanted to take the opportunity to look at potential ways in which we can encourage transparency and reverse some of these negative trends. We know that states parties often face significant barriers to consistent and transparent reporting. And so in our report, we highlight some of the resources that exist to help states parties with reporting, and also other comprehensive ATT implementation efforts, including resources that have been made available by the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting, the ATT Voluntary Trust Fund, the ATT Secretariat itself, the European Union, and of course, civil society. We also identify additional opportunities for states, the Treaty Secretariat, the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting, and civil society partners can use to strengthen ATT reporting, which I want to just sum up for you in the little time I have left. First, as was discussed in the working group meeting this morning, the ATT Secretariat, the Working Group on Transparency Reporting, civil society, and other interested parties should engage in detailed and coordinated outreach with non-reporting states parties to investigate the reasons for not reporting, identify specific obstacles to reporting, implement targeted and tangible solutions to overcome any such obstacles. And we should continue to investigate why some states parties that previously submitted annual reports have failed to do so in recent years, or have shifted from public reporting to private reporting, and then again address the circumstances that motivate these negative transparency trends. And I'm pleased to share that our next report in this series will be looking at the results of a survey that Stimson, in collaboration with CIPRI, conducted, trying to get a better understanding of states' reporting practices and motivations. I also want to just stress that it is never too late. There's no judgment in this data. It may feel like it, but we're not judging. We want to strongly encourage states parties that have yet to provide updates to their ATT initial reports or have overdue initial or annual reports to utilize the upcoming 10th anniversary of the ATT's adoption as a target date for submitting their past due reports and demonstrating a renewed commitment to the treaty's transparency objectives. To that end, I want to really commend the most recent updated initial report by Romania, because they are such a good example of really good practice for these kinds of updates. They use the revised template, they use track changes to indicate new and updated information, and they used the annex to flag where information was changed or added. And they responded to the new questions that were added in the revised template. So there's more information on Romania's national practices than we had before. It's not just their updated information, it's new information. And this is a great example for other states to follow. States parties should also periodically review and reevaluate their previously submitted annual reports to ensure their accuracy. And in case of reports submitted privately, reevaluate whether it's still necessary to restrict public access. If a state party wants to make a change to previously submitted reports, they should avail themselves of the opportunity, submit those amended reports to the ATT Secretariat. And we have examples of states that have revised their annual reports as well. And I think per Sabine's and Grizel's comments to start the event, the working group on transparency and reporting can help monitor reporting patterns and experiences over the coming years and get that state feedback to evaluate the use of and impact of the revised recommended reporting templates. If we do so, we can assist stakeholders in determining to what extent the revised templates have improved reporting practices, as well as if there's other changes that would be worth pursuing in future years to further enhance the template's utility and advance the treaty's transparency aims. With respect to initial reporting in particular, key stakeholders can support a peer review process to establish comprehensive national overviews of treaty implementation. And these overviews can then be used to create an online publicly accessible database of national implementation measures to enable further research and analysis of the ATT's impact on arms transfer regulations. And I think we've talked and we heard the EU's presentation on a comprehensive public searchable database for annual reports. We could also do the same for initial reports containing information at the national level and in aggregate to allow for detailed analysis of state by state practices, as well as general gaps and trends in treaty implementation. In the interim period, the ATT Secretariat can provide additional information on its existing initial report webpage, including insights on submission dates, on-time submissions, submissions by region, and clear and easy to find notifications on which states parties have updated their initial reports. Much of that information was provided, for example, in today's excellent presentation by the Secretariat, which would allow states to go back and look at the ATT Secretariat's website and provide greater insights into reporting practices and trends. In identifying these opportunities to assist states parties in fulfilling reporting obligations under the ATT is really an essential component of ensuring that the treaty lives up to its full potential. And I look forward to working with all of you to see that happen and to answering any questions that I may on these two new reports. So thank you very much. And let me now turn to my partner in all things ATT transparency and reporting related. For those who don't know, the ATT Monitor and Stimson work very closely together to both make sure we are not duplicating each other's efforts, but really that we're strengthening the efforts made on ATT reporting. And so I'm delighted to introduce my friend and colleague, Karina Solmerano, to tell us about some of the work that the ATT Monitor will be doing and releasing for CSP8, and to get insights, of course, from all of you on ATT reporting efforts. So Karina, over to you.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you for that excellent presentation. I always find very inspiring, to check on your recommendations and ways forward on these issues. Let me see if I can. Do you see my screen? Yes. Okay. Well, thank you again. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you to Rainer and the co-chairs of the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting for taking part on this event today. Just very briefly, for those who are new to this event today, let me tell you a little bit about the ATT Monitor. It is an independent project of control arms that was established in 2015, and since then, it acts as the de facto international monitoring mechanism for the Arms Trade Treaty, serves as a source of information on the implementation of and compliance with the ATT. We produce research and analysis that serves to strengthen treaty implementation efforts and improve the transparency of the conventional arms trade. Today, what I will be doing.
Sorry, Karina, I'm going to just stop you for a second. All I see is a black screen for you.
Oh, no.
Now. I don't know.
No.
Your picture disappeared.
Oh.
Maybe stop sharing and then try and share again.
Okay,
Sorry.
let's do this. Okay, hold on a second. That's very strange. Hold on. Now? No? No. Well,
if you want to send it to me quickly, I can share from my.
I'll send it to you. But in the meantime, you know, I can continue talking with you a little bit. So what I wanted to do today is to walk you through some of the research that the ATT monitor is conducting. And it's a paper that we will be publishing in the margins of the second round of preparatory meetings, hopefully in April. So stay tuned for that. What we do in this paper, and I want to take a step back to what we did last year, and probably some of you will find this information very repetitive. But hold on. But the analysis of the ATT monitor shows, as Rachel just mentioned, right, that over the first couple of years of ATT annual reporting, there is still much to be done. We find that in reality, these reporting practices have left much to be desired, and that states parties are probably not living up to the promise and requirements of the ATT. So last year, what we did was to conduct a study where we looked into 5 years of complete information of annual reports only. So we didn't do initial reports, only annual reports. And what we decided to do was to analyze this information based on 3 different categories. One was to look into states or annual reports that comply with just Article 13.3 reporting requirements, right? Just submit the report by the deadline, submit it on time, and submit, some sort of information about arms exports and imports, or nil reports as well. We then looked at a second category where we thought, well, we could, assess whether states, in addition to presenting, this information and complying with this Article 13.3 reporting obligations, they go a step further and they actually include more information that is not necessarily required in the mandatory form by the ATT, but that it, meaningfully contributes to the aims and objectives of the treaty. And the third category that we did was to go even further. So I think I'm on the third slide, Rachel. And we decided to go further and then look into those cases where states parties contribute to a higher standard of transparency. So unfortunately, what we found, I think we can go to the previous one, sorry. No, yeah. So what we found, unfortunately, is that only 12 states parties had meaningfully contributed to the aims and objectives of the treaty over that period of time. And even more strikingly, only 8 states parties had stood out as transparency champions, we could say. So in that context, and with these trends in mind, we wanted to provide more answers to questions regarding the challenges to ATT implementation. And so in this paper, we examine arms transfers data reported in both ATT annual reports, so submitted to the ATT Secretariat in a public form, of course, and compare with information submitted as well to the UN Register on Conventional Arms Reports. We chose these two reporting mechanisms because they are global in nature. We could have done the examination as well by looking into more detailed regional instruments, but we thought that this would cover with quite a breadth what we wanted to do. But we also used public sources of information to kind of compare as well the information that it's reported. What we wanted to do was to basically determine whether we know more about the global arms trade now and international arms transfer than we did a few years ago or 5 years ago. So if we go to the next one, the paper is divided in 3 main sections. Next slide. Yeah. So in the first one, we explore ATT reporting practices and trends, and we seek to understand where states parties have fallen short of their obligations under the treaty. In the second part of the paper, we examine potential gaps in reported arms transfers in the context of 2 humanitarian crises, and we suggest potential reasons for these gaps. And finally, we will offer, some broad recommendations for both states parties and the ATT Conference of the States Parties that can help to strengthen reporting and enhance transparency. So if we go to the next one, and I'm going to be super fast because Rachel covered this information. So two takeaways from this is, of course, the increasing trend in private reporting, but also the declining trend in the percentage of due reported reports that are submitted, during this period of analysis between 2015 and 2019. We heard today from the ATT Secretariat, and also Rachel mentioned, right? Sometimes, and I think Sabine also did it. As more states accede to the treaty, you would expect more states to report. So the percentages sometimes, that gap becomes, quite important because there is in general a declining trend in terms of, the submission of reports to the ATT Secretariat. We also look in the next slide, a similar trend with UN ROCA reporting trends. So the UN Register of Conventional Arms, it's a voluntary reporting mechanisms. UN state members can submit each year by the same deadline as the ATT Secretariat. This is 31st of May each year, their information on arms imports and exports from the previous calendar year. And so if we compare to the same period of time in which we look at this information, 2015 to 2019, we also see that there is a decline in the number of reports submitted. One interesting thing about this, and which is something that Rachel mentions in previous reports, is the fact that some states parties have stopped reporting to UN ROCA since they started reporting to the ATT, but some others have taken the opportunity to report to both. So that is a very, I think, something in this whole negative outlook. I think this is kind of, a positive thing that we need to take away with us. So after looking into these trends, the declining trends in both, the ATT Secretariat reporting and UN ROCA reporting, what we wanted to do, in the next slide, you're going to see some numbers. What we wanted to do is, what is it that states actually report? What is it that they reported over the 2015-2019 period? Rachel, if you can go to the next slide, sorry. Let's see if it works. No. Oh yeah, there we go. So what we wanted to do, we use our own database. Speaking about databases, the ATT Monitor database tracks all publicly available reports submitted by states parties to the ATT since they began submitting their annual reports in 2015. So we have quite a wealth of information in this database. So based on this information, what we found or identify is that ATT states parties have reported over this period of time 9,904 exports of weapons, right? Then we have a similar number of around 5,000 imports reported during the same time. But some of the numbers or percentages that I want to give you today, are more interesting. 79% of those reported exports included the numbers of arms transfer. So that's good. It's good to know how many weapons, are being transferred. Only 33% included the details of the value of the transfer. So we have, a difficulty there trying to understand a global financial aspect in terms of arms transfers. And I know that CIPRI also, has its own methodology, but it's a continuing challenge to add a value to what is the global arms trade. Unfortunately, only 30% of all these reported exports provided descriptions of the items being transferred. And I think this number, this very low number, is one that we need to, keep in mind. If we go to the next slide, please. If we dig a little bit even deeper into the database or into the information, we ask, looking into this 30% of the descriptions or comments, in the annual reports, what is it that the state parties report? And we find that, many of them, in terms of, thinking about an end user descriptions, we have words that repeat over and over as, museums, public displays, weapons going to the movie industry, collectors, and the like. We have actually identified more than 300 transfers that contain this type of comments in their annual reports. And don't get me wrong, this level of detail is very, very welcome on this and on any other type of transfer, because to achieve especially the ATT transparency requirements. But even with national security and commercial sensitivities in place, I think we believe that more detail for arms transfers to crisis or conflict zones should be included. And that leads me to the next slide, which is the case studies that we are undertaking. So we decided to look at two specific humanitarian crisis contexts and assess what type of gaps in reporting might exist based on all this information that we had collected and processed. And so we utilized, of course, our database, but we also took into consideration what's being reported to UN-ROCA and also to other public sources of information like the CIPRI Arms Transfers database, but also UN reports from a specific investigative agencies or bodies. And so some of the potential gaps that we are looking into is, the first one, I think, has to do with different interpretations of the scope of weapons covered by the ATT. And I think this is a challenge because on the one hand, we have a multiplicity of dual use items that are being transferred today. And it's very difficult probably for those filling in the annual reports to see whether these dual use items could, fall within the categories of the scope of the ATT or not. Should they be reported under voluntary national categories? Shouldn't be reported at all. So I think, that in this context, we have a little bit of a challenge, how do we interpret or how some states parties might understand, what is it that is covered by the ATT. The second potential gap, it's the exclusion of arms transfers information based on national security or commercial sensitivity reasons. Because states parties have the choice to withhold information based on these two reasons, it could be the case that certain transfers might appear in public sources, but not reported by a state party or not necessarily detailed by a state party on an ATT annual report. So states are sometimes marking that they have withhold information based on these two reasons, have also the option to indicate, for instance, if possible, where they have withheld that information. That, for instance, it's another way to increase transparency. The third potential gap is the omission of arms transfers descriptions. And as I mentioned before, only 30% of the reported exports, have some sort of description. And this might create, the lack of the description or the comments might create discrepancies or ambiguities in the way that we from the other side of the monitoring world understand what has been transferred to whom and for what purpose. And finally, it's the exclusion of certain arms transfers in publicly available ATT annual reports, but that are reported in other open sources, either media reports, journalism, investigative journalism, reports, of course, CIPRI or the UN, the finding documents of a specific investigative bodies. So these are the potential gaps we have identified so far. We will be applying, and we are actually matching the data and just comparing that and trying to apply that to these two specific case studies. So going to the last slide, which is just to close a little bit, we do think, and before calling preliminary recommendations, because we haven't necessarily, closed this, but I was thinking a little bit about this session this morning and the things that the co-chairs just indicated about what is it that, the civil society or, projects like Stimson and the ATT Monitor can do to contribute to the work of the ATT. I think there are a few issues that might come here as, next steps, ways forward, or other type of suggestions. One is, of course, prioritize transparency, but also accuracy, I would say. When submitting just a report and fulfilling that, obligation per year without indicating more information, it fulfills the transparency purpose of ATT reporting, but it doesn't necessarily provide more information so that we could really assess whether that country is meaningfully transparent or not. So I think it is important that the information that states parties provide, it's accurate. And on the other hand, also because the public sources of information are very easily available and they are accessible. And so, when we start comparing this information, we might find, things that are in the public domain, but are not necessarily in these reports. The other one, which comes, with the topic of, or one of the topics of conversation of today is submit public reports. We understand that some states report privately for their own reasons, but the reality is that everyone should start exploring what are the reasons behind the decision to keep these reports private. Of course, provide descriptions, because again, this would allow to anyone to be able to compare the information, to assess whether you find any discrepancy and how that discrepancy can be resolved. Can only be done if the descriptions and the comments are included in the annual reports. And finally, disaggregate the arms transfers data. Sometimes what we look into our information is that we know it's not mandatory, and especially with the small arms and light weapons categories, which might tend to be, very longer, parts of the report. But without the disaggregation, we have no insight into what types of, arms are being transferred to whom, again, for what purpose. And so finally, for the Conference of the States Parties and the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting, some of the issues that came out of this paper, and CIPRI did a wonderful job last year on the Taking Stock series as well, is to say, well, is it time to review the ATT scope? Could we think about that? As the definitions of certain categories of the UN ROCA, which are the ones that the ATT are based on, were updated or have been updated since 2014, the ATT scope needs also perhaps, an updating. And this is actually permitted under Article 17.4 of the treaty. The other one is to explore the options to mandate the use of the ATT reporting template. One of the things that are normally mentioned, and I think some of this was highlighted today as well, is that states have different ways in which they can submit their information. They can use the UN-ROCA template, they can use the ATT annual report template, they can use their own national templates or create their own national templates. And so the existence of so many of these of ways of capturing data makes, the compilation of reports and the comparison, of this information very, very difficult. And finally, capitalize on synergies. And this is of course, trying to take advantage of every opportunity to engage with, different ATT stakeholders that are working on the field of monitoring arms transfers, including, of course, NGOs, research institutes, the civil society, investigative journalists. So I really thank the co-chairs for indicating today that we can count on that with them. So we will be in touch, of course, with that. So that's the last that I wanted to mention. And I think we are fine with time. Rachel, we are going to, and I see that we have, and I think that we have a few questions here. I'm just gonna read the first one, which I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but let me see how it goes. As presented now, there is a growing decline in reporting rates to the ATT. The same situation with UN-ROCA in 1999-2008 period. 90 to 120 national reports were submitted annually to the ROCA. It seems necessary to conduct joint ODA, ATT respective NGOs research to explore what's behind the state's reluctance to report to either the UN-ROCA or the ATT. The research should explore what needs to be done to enhance understanding among states of the provision of national reports. Without reporting international arms transfers, the ATT will lose its meaning and value. So I want to provide Rachel an opportunity to reflect on this, and maybe perhaps then either Sabine or Grisel, if they have thought, about doing some joint work, to explore, what might be behind these declining reporting trends. Rachel?
Thank you, Karina, and thank you for the question. Our Taking Stock of ATT annual report, we need another word for report, study, has an entire section actually looking at the comparison of UN-ROCA and ATT reporting comparisons, and sort of this weird discrepancy between, we're trying to increase reporting, but we're seeing fewer reports. And so we know that, for example, UN-ROCA reporting fell from a peak of 124 states submitting reports for 2001 to an average of about 42 states from years between 2013 to 2020. And then we have an average of 60 states that have submitted ATT annual reports each year since 2016. So we're seeing an increase because there wasn't ATT reporting before. So we have 60 states versus 42, but it's very challenging. And I should also note that UN-ROCA reporting are all public reports. They're voluntary and they are public. There are 3 states parties that have never submitted to UN-ROCA, but that have submitted ATT annual reports. All 3 of those reports were submitted to the ATT privately. But as I said, we are still seeing states that have never submitted to the UN-ROCA participating in the ATT transparency measures. Kazakhstan, for example, had never submitted a UN-ROCA report since 2012. So it had stopped submitting to ROCA, did submit to the ATT, and then went back and submitted back to UN-ROCA. So perhaps there is some connections. And again, there's some other countries that within the first 3 years of submitting their ATT annual reports, they returned to reporting under UN ROCA. So, there are some positive signs. There's some negative signs as well. There are states that stopped reporting to UN ROCA once they started reporting to the ATT. And weirdly, there's also states that haven't submitted ATT reports, but have submitted UN ROCA reports for just even the most recent year in 2020. So I'd like to say there are some obvious trends, but there are some strange outliers that I think this goes back to our discussion of needing to delve a little deeper and ask questions about what are those impediments to reporting, what is the process, because presumably if you have a process to report to UN ROCA, you should be able to report to the ATT and vice versa. And so I think that the question points to a really important discussion about synergies, about utilizing the processes and systems and encouraging that reporting across the board, because all of these provide different information and allow us to get a more comprehensive picture.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. Sabine or Grisel, any reflections on your end?
Yes, thank you very much for making the link to the NROCA reporting. I think looking at synergies, possible synergies between ATT and NROCA reporting, I think that's very important. It also helps with the reporting fatigue that does sort of occur when you have to hand in all these separate reports. I know in my country, we submit the same information to the NROCA reporting and the ATT reporting. So I think there's a lot of room to come to more synergies there. I had not considered myself the idea of doing a joint sort of outreach effort with NROCA, but it's a good suggestion. So we'll take it on board. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, and I was going to mention if the reporting fatigue is something that we will, be seen in the future as well with the ATT, right? Even before the ATT with the UN ROCA, we saw that, high peak and then, of course, what the colleagues mentioned, a drop or, a slow, decline in reporting. And even with some of the more regional mechanisms, I'm thinking about, in the Latin American region as well, we used to have mechanisms for reporting. I don't know, Grisel, if you remember, one of the Inter-American, registries that we had, and it just, it was live for a few years, and the states used to report a lot of that, based on UN ROCA, but then they stopped doing it. So I think there's something there about, the behavior of the states in the sense of, trying to maximize perhaps their time and just, choosing one over the other, perhaps, when in reality, it's, it could be easy to send both at the same time, especially because the ATT, and this is going to lead me to my next question that I have here, the ATT allows for states to present the UN ROCA template. So, we could, do 2 in 1. Thank you. So I see one question here that comes from the Human Equity Fund. It says we can have the states all submit reports that will be open at a later date as to create transparency, long-term and reliable credit amongst the organization. I'm not sure if this is a question or a comment.
I think
Rachel?
I think it's the sort of reflecting the point that I was making in my presentation, that it is possible to go back, and if you had a report submitted privately, because at the time the information was sensitive, it is possible to go back and make that report public a year, 2 years, 3 years later. And so states, that's what I was saying, states should reevaluate their reasons for having reports be private or for not submitting a report. You can always go back if you've missed a year for some reason, maybe it's due to the pandemic, you can still provide that information even if it is delayed, and it is still useful from an analytical perspective, for a trends perspective. So I do strongly encourage states to do so, and continue that process of at least submitting your report each year at the very least. Can I also address? There's a question. Yeah. I don't know if anyone else has. Something on that. There's also a question about having better transparency using like distributive ledger technology. And I don't want to announce anything prematurely, but I'm hopefully announcing soon that Stimson will be conducting a feasibility project looking at how we could use DLT to better regulate and control and have more secure global conventional arms transfer. So watch this space because I'm hoping in the next few weeks we'll be able to share details of that project. But it's very exciting, and I think we've seen, and Stimson has piloted some of this work on DLT for WMD materials, and we have a project on SLAFCA you can find on our website, and maybe we can put in the chat about DLT, but there is potential application, I think, for much of the information that's included in the annual reports, if states had a more secure means of sharing that transfer information with other states and with other parties along that transfer chain, that could enhance security of transfers and perhaps actually minimize or mitigate diversion in some ways as well.
I had muted myself and forgot to unmute. Thank you so much. I see one question here that it's directed to me. It says, could you elaborate also on the possible shortcomings, if any, of mandating the use of the ATT template only? So, Rachel and I can probably share some views on this. Look, after this morning session, the more I think, the more I find it difficult, that this could be something that, in the near future could be mandated. I think there is, for many reasons, look, so on the positive side, having a standardized reporting template would make, of course, comparability much easier. This could come, of course, from my own, selfish perspective of trying to understand the information much better and to be able to assess and analyze better the information. But I do understand that from the beginning, this was an issue as well, right? That states would have the choice to report in their own, in these different ways, right? Either with the UN ROCA or the national templates. I think that one of the shortcomings, if this was something that the CSP would explore in the future, it could be a backlash of states stopping to report at all. I think there might be, and that's not what we want to. But it only occurred to me this morning, when I already had this presentation done, that, based on some of the comments from the speakers on the floor, that, this could create some sort of resistances. But I don't know, Rachel, if you have any insight on that as well.
So I think there was a very specific reason why we didn't mandate the ATT template in the beginning of this process, or reasons, I should say. And I think the revisions to the template now give us an opportunity to again reflect, is the new template, the revised template, will those provide us with the information that helps us achieve the level of transparency and confidence building that we're looking for? So I hope that we take some time to get a few years worth of data and analyze if we've seen a shift from the first 6 years to perhaps the next 6 years. Do we have an increase in information, in patterns and trends? Are states more willing to provide or less willing to provide certain information? And then we can tweak as necessary, because there are benefits to not using the template if you want to provide additional information in an additional format. And so it's a very tight balance. And I'm saying this as someone who likes the consistency of everyone using the same template, because it makes it much easier to compare responses and information. But there are sometimes those states that I'm very pleased to see provide a different version of the information that's far more comprehensive. So I do think we should see how these templates work, and what, there are always more ways to improve any document, any form. And so, taking some time to do some thoughtful analysis and see what the data show gives us an opportunity to reflect, a few years from now.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Rachel. And I know that the co-chairs have also put the issue of the new reporting templates, for the next round of meetings in April. So we look forward as well to, engaging in that discussion once that happens, and, probably provide some thoughts and insights into that. I don't see any other questions from my end here in the Q&A. Just the last one is it possible to get the presentations? I think we can probably share that later on.
We can add them to the event.
To the event, yes, exactly.
Event.
Yeah, that would be great. Okay, thank you so much. So Rachel, I pass it on to you for your closing remarks, I guess, if there's not other question, coming in this last couple of minutes.
Sure, thank you, Karina. And I will follow the leads of our very able co-chairs from this morning, who also ended the session a little early and made us all feel really good that we got a little time back. So I do want to offer Sabine, Grizel, and Reiner an opportunity to make any final remarks before I make my concluding remarks. So I'll open the floor to any of them if you would like to make final remarks. Reiner, please.
Remark. I heard the word reporting fatigue. This is a strange term. Let's join hands to make reporting fatigue a kind of reporting happiness. Civil society should be more powerful to support reporting. No, thanks. It was interesting. As always, it was nice joining you, and go on with your valuable work. Thanks for this side event. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Reiner. Karina and I always have reporting happiness. I think we probably spend more time reading all of these reports and figuring out, who was the sixth update. Going through all 76 reports, clicking on every single one to figure out, has there been an update? So some of us really do have happiness, but I recognize that it is a challenge, particularly during the last 2 years of this pandemic, that it often does seem like an extra obligation that isn't necessary, but it is necessary, and there are lots of benefits to reporting. And so I agree, we should make reporting happiness a national or international day for everyone. Sabine or Grizel, do you have any last comments?
Well, I think we certainly can agree with that. So let's all go for reporting happiness in the future. We also, I think, would like to thank you for all your presenting and sharing your findings with us, and for all the recommendations that you put forward today. That would be very helpful. So please continue your great work on reporting and continue to engage with us. And thank you very much for having us.
Yes, thank you. I also, as Sabine, I want to thank both of you and all the participants to be here with us, and for your presentation, and also for the very good questions that were put forward. And we look forward to continue our engagement, and also to digest all this information that you have shared with us, all the recommendations, because we think that many of them are very useful, not only for this cycle, but also how to path the way for the next cycles in terms of enhancing transparency and reporting in ATT. So thank you so much.
Thank you to all three of you for joining us. And if you want some additional reporting happiness, there are 3 very fun reporting videos. I showed one at the beginning of this session, but we have 2 others on compliance and private reporting for you to view. So all of those links are available, and as are the reports that I briefed on today. Stimson's work on reporting will continue throughout the CSP8 cycle. The theme is taking stock of ATT reporting, and so each of our presentations and reports over the next 9 months are really looking at different elements of reporting. And so, as I mentioned, we look forward to, in April, sharing with you the results of the survey that we conducted. Yes, I still have a landline, believe it or not, I still have a landline. the results of the survey that we conducted in cooperation with CIPRI on states reporting practices. So watch this space, and hopefully we'll be able to share that in person with all of you. But I'm continually inspired by the number of people that participate and attend these virtual events on something as, you know, in the weeds as ATT reporting efforts. It's really inspiring to know that there are people very committed to this issue. And I'm going to speak on behalf of Karina for a moment, which I generally don't like to do, but I think she would agree with me that we really appreciate all of the support and efforts to increase transparency. It is a central component of the ATT, and we look forward to continuing to work with all of you on these topics. So I wish Sabine and Grisel very good luck as they finish their work for this particular working group session and moving into the April sessions. And we look forward to joining you along the way. Thank you all for joining this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are, and have a great day.